The reason why we don't have group telepathy, which it actually seems to possibly be the norm in nature, if you look at a school of fish, the perfect simultaneity of movement, a flock of birds, how hive insects, social insects operate. Group telepathy may be more the norm in nature. What I think happened that served a great evolutionary purpose was that the ego created more of a firewall, encapsulating the psyche and reducing group telepathy. That the loss of group telepathy did was it created the greatest engine of novelty ever created, individuality. So a lot of the individuality is highly pathological, more so than with animals or people who grow up in more collectivized societies who don't have as many psychopathologies as we have. But that's part of the alchemical light and dark novelty. But it served a great purpose, which is part of the fear of group telepathy, is the loss of individuality.
Welcome to Connecting with Coincidence. I am your host, Bernard Beitman, and we will be discussing the future of humanity today. Why will we be discussing it? Well, I'm finishing a book called Humanity or Therapy for Humanity. And humanity is in crisis right now. And over the next months, I'll be interviewing people who have some contribution to helping us understand how we can change that trajectory, that suicidal trajectory of humanity. A lot of people know that. They see various problems, but what can we do about it? And as our guest today will emphasize, it starts with each one of us. But I suggest that each one of us is part of something that I call the collective human organism. We are each a cell in this collective human organism. Synchronicity can be a great help as part of the therapy for the collective human organism. Our guest today is Jonathan Zapp, who grew up in the Bronx and attended the Bronx High School of Science. He graduated from Ursinus College with honors in philosophy and English, and received his master's degree in English from NYU. Jonathan is an author, philosopher, journalist, and teacher with a background in Jungian psychology, paranormal research, and a wide variety of subjects relevant to his multidisciplinary approach to understanding psychology in general, popular culture, and contemporary mythology. Jonathan, welcome to Connecting with Coincidence.
Thank you. Glad to be here, even if it's not coincidental, but scheduled. I'm glad to be here.
That's right. It ain't no coincidence if you can explain it. But here we are coincidentally on purpose. So it's not a coincidence. It is a coincidence. It's not a synchronicity because synchronicity tends to be, you can't explain it. And you will tell us about a synchronicity that led you to what you're calling singularity. Singularity has several different meanings in popular culture. You have a particular one, and tell us what you mean by singularity, and please then tell us the story, the coincidence story that led you to Jung and to singularity.
So what I call it is the singularity archetype, and you're right, singularity has different definitions in math and physics and popular culture. But the singularity archetype relates to the parallel event horizons of death and species metamorphosis. And these tend to parallel because, like a hologram or a fractal, the small part recapitulates the whole. And so the life cycle of the individual and the life cycle of the species have this parallelism. And so the things that are in futuristic visions, like the movie 2001, Village of the Damned, based on the novel Midwich Cuckoos, and other things in popular mythology, where we've always found the expression of archetypes, from ancient times to the present. Um, all the futuristic themes, such as network telepathy, a breakdown of the boundary between self and other, a transcendence of linear time, a transcendence of the mortal corporeal body, and so forth. These are all phenomenological actualities in near-death experience. And in other extraordinary experiences like out-of-body experiences, psychedelic experiences, and so forth. And so the singularity archetype and it's important to understand that archetypes are not merely patterns, but they are living agencies that exist in a plane of reality. Jung called the collective unconscious. They form our personalities, they form human culture, and are also formed by the same. So there's a kind of a two-way feedback loop between individual psyches and the archetypes themselves. But the singularity archetype mediates our crossing the event horizon of death and our the event horizon that we are now hurtling to, especially since everything that's going on with AI, we're now objectively in that zone of where the species is going through a fundamental metamorphosis. So singularity means a state, a rupture of plane experience where every core value, ego, time, sexuality, all of those things change as we approach and as we cross and get to the other side of the singularity.
And let's talk. Let's define event horizon and how that's similar to the idea of singularity.
Well, so the event horizon is when you are actually crossing the threshold into a completely new state of both consciousness and communication. And those are always go together. There's no great change in consciousness without a great change in communication. And any great change in communication alters consciousness as well, as even like
Yeah,
Marshall McLuhan pointed out.
they're feedback loops.
Right, exactly.
You have to have them together, and we consciousness communication. We're communicating. Our consciousness is are required, and then each of us is changed by that communication. So let's now say that we are at an event horizon, humanity is, where a major transformation is taking place. And it's a singularity in the sense of major transformation, but it's happening now. So if I understand it, the event horizon, it takes place within the singularity.
Right. I mean, you can't draw too sharp a distinction between them because
Good.
they're
They're about
different
the
ways of
same.
saying the same thing,
They're
basically.
about the same. So okay,
Right.
I'm good. Let's since they sound like different terms, we have now said they're very similar and they have some different some nuances. But let's stay singularity, event horizon, major transition in human consciousness. And you got to this singularity, this archetype of singularity that is, as you're suggesting, as archetypes can do, is shaping the way humanity is thinking about itself and its way into the future. How did you get to realizing this singularity?
Well, so one way of describing it, just in general, is I follow what I call the path of the numinous, and this is very related to your work with synchronicity because synchronicities are numinous. And just to define the term, numen means spirit. Something's numinous; it lights up with an uncanny significance. And some people ignore things like that or don't pay attention to them. Others, like yourself, follow those things. And one of the things that was highly numinous for me um, growing up in the Bronx were certain science fiction stories. For example, um, sometime when I was about 12 or 13 years old, I watched the movie Village of the Damned, a British 1960 black and white science fiction film. With my dad, and any afternoon on a black and white television, and it was like a religious experience. It somehow stirred something deep inside that I knew had this incredible significance. And then other stories did too, like Arthur C. Clarke's Childhood's End. I had my own juvenile ideas for science fiction stories. Here were some of the same ideas in a book that was published 4 years before I was born. How could that be possible?
Which Arthur C. Clarke book are you talking about?
Childhood's End.
Oh,
But of
that's the
course,
one.
2001 is even a better representation of the singularity
Well,
archetype.
for those of you who don't know Childhood's End, there's a remarkable part in the end of Childhood's End where the children go off into the forest and the parents can't find them. They don't know what they're up to. And they later find out that the children are finding each other telepathically. And this strongly resembles what is in the telepathic tapes. For those of you who are not familiar with them, the telepathic tapes are tapes about autistic children who can't speak, who communicate telepathically. And these kids gather on the hill, which is very much like Arthur C. Clarke's Children in the Forest telepathically communicating with each other.
Exactly. And in Childhood's End, we also have new children who are born who also form a telepathic network as well. So this is a common theme in the singularity archetype and is also what happens in near-death experience. So in near-death experience, when you have the life review, it's not merely that you are seeing a, video recording of a scene you were in. You are simultaneously aware of the thoughts and feelings of other people in the room in ways that you were not aware when the events were happening. So you are, in effect, in this telepathic network. I use the term homo gestalt, something I got from another science fiction writer of the classic era, Ted Sturgeon, who wrote a fantastic novel called More Than Human about a group of mutants who find each other and form a somewhat dysfunctional telepathic network. And when they are telepathically merging, they call it bleshing. And I haven't used that term very much, but homo gestalt, it's hard to find a better term than that for human beings that are telepathically networked.
Good. So let's go back to the Bronx, age 12 or 13.
Right. So now, so I see that movie. There were other moments in that. There were my own paranormal experiences, which began with a life-changing one at 2.5 years old and then continued. And then by the time I'm 20 years old, my last year of college, I have a chance to write a philosophy honors paper where I have a wide latitude of what I'm going to explore. And I decide I want to find out, what is this all about? Why were these particular science fiction stories and so forth so numinous for me? So I actually went to my mom, who was a clinical psychologist for 44 years, and told her what I was interested in. And she said, well, you should look into this guy, Carl Jung, and his theory of the collective unconscious and the archetypes. So I go up to the second floor of the Ursinus Library. There are the impressive 20 volumes of the Princeton Bowlingen edition of Jung's collected works. But I'm also kind of skeptical because it's my mom told me this guy reached manhood in the 19th century, son of a Protestant minister. What is he going to say that's going to be relevant to the weird sci-fi obsessions of this Jewish kid from the Bronx? But I pull down the index volume and I see, oh, wow, he wrote a book called Flying Saucers, a modern myth of things seen in the sky. Well, that's a direct hit because Village of the Damned, Childhood's End, they all begin with flying saucers. So I start skimming through that book, and I could see, well, Jung was writing about this around the time I was born, and he couldn't let go of the subject, because after the end of the book there's an epilogue, then after that there's an afterword, and then after that there's a supplement. And when I start reading the supplement, my jaw drops open and there's just a feeling of electricity in the air, because Jung is analyzing the science fiction novel The Midwich Cuckoos by John Wyndham, a British science fiction writer. That was the novel that the movie Village of the Damned was based on. And so now I am reading Jung. It was as if Jung were a holographic wizard bearing a torch, stepping out of the bookcase and saying, like, yeah, I was fascinated with that one too. Here's what I thought. And there were some parallels in our thinking. And then I looked at the last lines of his analysis in the supplement, and he says it ends with this wonderfully ambiguous note, a weird way to end a book, but Jung is very big on ambiguity, and I am too. And he says, thus the negative ending of the story gives reason for doubt. Well, I was able, because I lived, Jung died in 1961. I lived longer to see this unfold more, the modern expression of the singularity archetype, and I was able to resolve that doubt. And what it is that when the ego perceives death, it sees emergency. When what Jung called the self, the trans-temporal totality of all the psychic structures, the soul, the ego, everything, sees it, it sees emergence. Similarly, when the ego sees the evolutionary singularity or event horizon, it sees apocalypse. Every archetype has a light and dark side. The dark side of the singularity archetype is apocalypticism, which predates Judeo-Christian Zoroastrianism. It seems to start happening in the late Paleolithic. When the self perceives the very same archetype, event horizon, it sees metamorphosis and evolutionary metamorphosis. The ego point of view, however, is not wrong, because, death often presents as emergency. If I'm having a fatal heart attack, it's sure as hell going to feel like an emergency. Maybe I'll feel the emergence later. From the ego point of view, looking at the metamorphosis of the species, well, it's like, I'm at about DEFCON 2.5 now as I look out at, what's happening in the world. And it's all very alarming. And all the things that the ego is concerning about, like keeping us in a body and keeping us healthy and sheltered and all that kind of stuff, are definitely threatened by a lot of incoming developments. And so it's important to respect the ego's perspective. But John Wyndham himself wrote this novel, The Midwich Cuckoos, from the point of view of the ego, where the new children who are telepathically networked are seen very negatively and as a existential threat to Homo sapiens. However, he wrote another novel that's considered his greatest, called The Chrysalids, where you have kids in a very repressive post-apocalyptic, post-thermonuclear apocalypse society. And it was actually something that inspired Margaret Atwood to write The Handmaid's Tale, because they're very like super Christian, and they every child is inspected for any signs of mutation, like an extra toe or something, and those children are killed. But these children discover that they are telepathically, even though they're physically not anomalous, that they're able to telepathically communicate, and they become aware of other telepaths elsewhere on the planet, and some of whom live in a society that embraces this metamorphosis and has developed those abilities further and makes contact with them and attempts to rescue them. So in that novel, he's seeing the same evolutionary development, but from the much more positive perspective of the self.
And this coincidence, I'm blaming on your mother, as we tend to do,
Sure.
got you to seeing a remarkable coincidence between what the science fiction movie you were watching with your dad and Jung's writing about that same story.
Right.
And you found yourself able to then continue that story because Jung had died. And the key part to me here, and for our audience, I hope, is the ability of telepathic communication to take place in groups. That is part of the future singularity, of future of the singularity that we are currently in.
Right. And when there is an evolutionary metamorphosis, it begins episodically, long in advance of when it would begin for the whole species, or on a wider scale. So all the if we took all the paranormal things that happen episodically,
Yeah.
And were to put all of them together, just imagine all the emergent effects. If all of those paranormal abilities that we have such empirical evidence of, like short-term clairvoyance and telepathy and so forth, if all of these things were to emerge at once, And so we see this group telepathy happen. Apparently, early anthropologists observing ayahuasca circles used to
Uh-huh.
call ayahuasca telepathine because they saw that they would have this synesthesia-like group telepathy where the songs that the ayahuasquero, the ayahuasca shaman would sing, they would all see as a visual symphony and be able and see it very similarly or identically and be able to comment on it afterwards and so forth. Another case where we see this type of um, telepathy, usually involving two people, is mutual dreaming. So now, if you
I
think
love those. I love those.
Right. So now, if you think about, I remember my social studies teacher at the Bronx High School of Science once really got my attention by saying the movies were the queen of the arts. And then he explained, well, in a movie, it begins with writing, a screenplay, but you can have dance, you can have song, it's a much richer modality of communication that it can subsume all the others. But when you transcend something, always includes what you transcended. So it's not like we don't have words in movies. It's not like we don't have speech and writing, but it transcends, it includes everything else. And so if you think about how rich the communication of mutual dreaming is, imagine if you as a psychiatrist could put somebody on the couch and you would see their whole memory, however distorted it might be, of their early childhood trauma, and you would experience that together. Well, that actually happens in what Raymond Moody calls the shared death experience. He has a book about this. This is what finally conquered his skeptical stance on near-death experience, because he was not only a professor of Greek philosophy but of logic. So for most of his career, he didn't even say that it proved afterlife. But after he had his own shared death experience, I've had one myself.
Well,
Um,
let's pause for a moment. There are many forms of shared death experiences. I had a version of it that's only about 15% of such things where I was choking uncontrollably, and 3,000 miles away, my father was bleeding into his throat and dying around the same time. That was a shared death experience of a physical nature. But the shared death experiences that are more common, which are currently being studied and data being gathered, are about people who actually go on the dying experience of the person who is dying. So they have something that's like a near-death experience, but isn't, as they accompany their loved ones in the journey of death.
Right. And those seem to be more likely to happen for people who are in the room with someone, even though most of these paranormal effects are non-local. But Raymond Moody was in the room with someone. I had a remote, like you did. I was far away, shared death experience with my sister a couple of years ago. And so
Well,
they are in different ways.
let's stay with, I think that one of the most important things that you're bringing to this entire discussion of human evolution, which is that these telepathic experiences, as you had with your sister and Raymond Moody and the shared death experience, and as I had in a simpler version just the other day, where I was thinking intensely of a friend of mine who I wanted to see, but he's very busy. And he calls me yesterday and says, I just felt I needed to call you. And it was because I was intensely thinking of him. And
Mhm.
and he could pick that up because he's that kind of, he's open and we're connected. I'm getting a little antsy or anxious to have more of these experiences than I'm participating in now. So yeah, you, others are having these as individuals, but as you are saying, we come to coalesce these experiences as the human species gets used to the idea of being able to have group telepathy.
Well, one thing to address, it's just like as a psychiatrist, you know that when you are trying to help somebody with a neurotic symptom, one of the first steps is to realize what purpose does it serve?
Yeah.
It didn't come into being just as like an accidental bug you picked up. It had their secondary gain, that it served a purpose for the personality that may now be obsolete, but
Yes,
it served a purpose. We need to understand that to understand how to transcend it. So the reason why we don't have group telepathy, which it actually seems to possibly be the norm in nature, if you look at a school of fish, their perfect simultaneity of movement, a flock of birds, how hive insects, social insects operate. Group telepathy may be more the norm in nature. What I think happened that served a great evolutionary purpose was that the ego created more of a firewall, encapsulating the psyche and reducing group telepathy. That, for example, the Australian Aborigines seem to operate with a lot of group telepathy and could communicate with their fellow members of their tribe when they were out in the field hunting and things like that. What the loss of group telepathy did was it created the greatest engine of novelty ever created, individuality. Now, because with novelty, it is kind of a function of expanding charging the poles of light and dark. You know, the outer edge of light and the outer edge of dark must both intensify, and then the novelty is almost like the amplitude between these two potentiated poles. So a lot of the individuality is highly pathological, more so than with animals or people who grow up in more collectivized societies who don't have as many psychopathologies as we have. But that's part of the alchemical light and dark novelty. But it served a great purpose, which is part of the fear of group telepathy, is the loss of individuality.
that is. Yes.
Right. So in the Dune books, we see the greatest sci-fi masterpiece of all time. We see a very particular form of group telepathy where in order to become a Bene Gesserit Reverend Mother, with this kind of like fantastically advanced sisterhood, warrior sisterhood, who are trying to advance human evolution, they do a ritual with what you might consider an ordeal poison, where they take what's called the water of life, and either it kills you, or if you're able to convert the poison in your body, you become a Reverend Mother. And that means that you retain your individuality, but now you are in a telepathic network with all the Reverend Mothers, living or dead, who have survived that rite. But if you don't retain your individuality, they call that abomination. If you're dominated by one of those psyches, that's not considered not good. So in the Dune books, you have a sophisticated model of it where it's understood that the danger of you don't try that right unless you have the potential to be a Reverend Mother,
Yeah,
and it's still like
it's a big, it's death or everything is what you end up getting.
right,
Um,
because but maybe we wouldn't want people to have group telepathy so perfectly until their individual psyches have developed
and
more.
that's
Cost everything.
that's such an important point, and you are making it. That we have to develop individually in order to be able to create the group cohesiveness, which is necessary and what we need in the future of humanity, and the future like tomorrow, but it won't happen tomorrow, a future in which each cell of the collective human organism is both an independent functioning, each with its own designed purpose, like the cells of a body, while also being able to collaborate effectively and efficiently with the entire collective human organism, so that, like the swarm of yellow jackets in my front yard, uh, who are protecting their queen, the collective human organism is able to communicate with the other cells while each cell is functioning with its own particular purpose.
Yes, and like in More Than Human, Ted Sturgeon's 1953, I think, novel, the individuals who form the Homo Gestalt, they're all highly underdeveloped, and it's a very dysfunctional Homo Gestalt. But they have specialized roles. So, like one who is like the ego or the executive, you know, is killed, and then another one who plays that role, but he's kind of sociopathic and is just a child. And so
The point you're trying to make is that it doesn't work very well unless each individual is evolved enough to be able to participate.
right. And this is a
Okay.
discussion I had with both Terence McKenna at different times and Ram Dass, where they both saw this same change happening that you're anticipating with the group telepathy. And they thought, with too much optimism, I think, that it would resolve all problems. There'd be no violence because you would know you were
No,
doing
no,
it
no.
for
We're still
yourself.
going to
And
be
I,
individuals.
exactly,
We're,
exactly.
I'm developing a new myth for humanity as part of
Right,
this book. And
right,
I can't get away from the shadow of being an individual. You're going to have
exactly.
that stuff happening, but it's at those clashes, it's in those conflicts, it's in those polarities that evolution and change will take place.
Right, exactly. And this is why I say that story structure is the best explanatory tool I've ever found, because if you have a story with no conflict, you have no story, right?
You have
So,
no
so
story.
if
Also,
no,
if you,
therefore there's no development, there's no evolution of consciousness if there's
I
nothing to conflict with.
I'm glad you bring that up because there's also no coincidence, no story. Yeah,
Right, absolutely.
you need them together. So let's talk about the relationship between oracles and synchronicity and what the AI oracle you are working on would change that relationship.
Okay, so all oracles, and I was influenced toward this point of view from Jung's introduction to the Wilhelm Baines I Ching, are basically, I call them like an attempt at a synchronicity on demand.
Yeah.
Because the idea of an oracle is you have a set of archetypal signifiers, the 64 hexagrams of the I Ching, the 72 or 78 cards of the Tarot, and that represent classic human states. And the idea is you want it to be a mirror of your psyche. And then through a seemingly random process, like shuffling the cards or tossing yarrow sticks or 3 coins for the I Ching, you're hoping for a synchronicity, that there will be a parallelism between what's happening with this randomizer and you will get the appropriate card. But what most tarot readers, basically all I've ever met, are oracle readers of any kind, never admit the fact that synchronicity isn't always available. So sometimes you get irrelevant results, but there seems to be, and this is an interesting observation about synchronicity, is there seem to be zones of time, at least for me, where I will do an I Ching reading and it is like a diamond bullet. And I'll do my own oracle called the Zapp Oracle I've been working on since a child. It was actually invented by synchronicity and invented itself, which I can explain. But where every card is so relevant, it's so obviously not random. And then I will do a number of readings when I'm in such a zone, and that effect will continue. But there are other times when everything looks random or even straight up wrong, and I'll know that the synchronicity is not just available. So this has been the strength and the weakness of oracles all along, is the dependence on synchronicity. Right.
That's a very, very important idea, Jonathan. I was for quite a while a tarot card reader. I carried around a pack like a holster of the Aleister Crowley Book of Thoth, and I'd pull them out at different times. And I never thought that there are better times. And I think some of the times may be correlated with when our waking mind brain is in REM activity, rapid eye movement activity, like when we dream. But we don't know. We could be in a flow. But the important point I take away from this is that there are times that are better and times that are worse to do oracle readings. I the AI is so important these days and getting more and more important. So you are developing an AI oracle, as I understand it.
And it came through an incredible synchronicity. And but yeah, I mean, just to respond to your other idea, as Terence McKenna put it, that there seem to be seasons in time, like where novelty is higher, or synchronicity is higher. We know that there are some days where you wake up from a lucid dream and you have three synchronicities before breakfast, and other days when things just seem mundane and mechanical.
Yep.
And so, it's about recognizing those seasons in time that may be individual, or maybe they're for the whole species or a group or whatever.
Well,
But
let's say they're going to be for the whole species, because what I hope we'll get to is the way
sure.
synchronicity can help in the human evolution that we so desperately need right now.
Yeah, so I would love to get to that too. But to finish the thing about the AI oracle, so here was the synchronicity. I go to festivals where I do free dream interpretation and oracle readings for people. And I went to a tiny one called Unison, right on the border of New Mexico and Colorado. This was in 2023. And a young trans person, a 24-year-old bio male trans female, came up to me very excitedly. Later, I learned that she had also taken acid, and said, "I saw your laminates, at your state oracle station, and we're both working on computational oracle." She had never been to a festival before. And later I would, when we went to other festivals together, and she's now one of my closest friends. I was just staying at her ranch in Trinidad, Colorado. I would introduce us as cops. And of course, she's an androgynously very attractive young trans person, so we get the odd looks. And then I would wait a couple of beats and say, like, computational oracle pioneers. What did you think I meant? And that kind of thing. So anyway, it turned out that the two computational oracle pioneers were there at the same festival, and also just 2 weeks before, another synchronicity. Both myself and my webmaster, independent of each other, came up with the idea of, like, why not come up with an AI large language model of my oracle, the Zapp oracle? Okay, so Lily was already writing the code. She's an AI engineer and a polymath science genius, and a mystic as well. Was already creating. It's now finished. The first large language model Tarot called Oracle's Dream. It's cross-linked with my oracle. And but now the way now when she was going to build, or she is building, it's actually in an alpha stage right now, it already works, a Zap chat, which is an AI large language model of my oracle. My oracle has 720 cards, and it's been a computational oracle for 20 years, but it has a history that relates to synchronicity before that, which I should also get into. But
Well, just don't do it yet.
okay, I won't do it yet. Let me finish this with the causal oracle idea. So when she was writing the code for ZapChat, she was going to use a randomizer, as she did with her own oracle, to choose the cards. But then it had a function where it was looking for the most similar cards to write the statement it would create to respond to the querent's query. And I found that that was actually the most useful function, because now it was no longer dependent on synchronicity. It was intelligently understanding the user's query, and it was selecting the most relevant cards to it. So what I'm going to be doing is giving users both options, where now we'll have the first causal oracle as compared to the acausal synchronicity, where it will choose the cards not at random or not depending on synchronicity, but through their relevance to the user's query. However, I will also offer the old-fashioned synchronicity based computational oracle that uses a randomizing algorithm, because what synchronicity can do that the causal version can't is recognize an unrecognized complex.
That's right.
Because oracles famously respond to the biggest question hanging over someone, even if it's not what they asked. So they can do something that the causal one can't, but the causal one can more reliably be relevant.
Well, that's very intriguing to this modest tarot card reader, and to use AI that way is beautiful. Randomizer versus let you just pick the cards of 700 plus cards that fit for this particular question, because the AI can't think outside its own box. It has to stay with what it has. and the randomizer makes that less likely to happen. So would you comment on the AI? I'm curious to have the AI oracle describe what AI's role is going to be in the future for humanity.
Oh, well, that's another. I'll be glad to get into that because AI is crucial to this whole discussion of the singularity archetype and synchronicity as well in some ways. But let me tell you the synchronicity that created the Zapp Oracle. As a child, my parents were super intellectuals. My dad was an artist. So we're always going to art museums, especially the Museum of Modern Art and the Metropolitan Museum of Art. And I would wander into the gift shop and buy art postcards that were numinous to me, basically, that I was drawn to at the time. They were maybe only a nickel or something. And eventually I had a whole camera bag full of these cards. And in 1978, everything happened in 1978. When I first had my own place where I could put postcards on a refrigerator with magnets, I decided every Friday as like a Sabbath ritual, I would pull 4 cards out and put them on the refrigerator. What I discovered was that the 4 cards that I picked, I assumed at random, were an oracle reading for the week that was to follow. And were a commentary through the visual iconography and symbolism in the cards of what was about to happen. So the oracle invented itself through synchronicity. And then I started consciously using it as an oracle, and like it went on from there. And then in 2003, during another major synchronicity, it went online. But
let's go back to what I think is a crucial question. Is using the AI oracle to
right.
tell us about the future of AI and humanity?
What it tells us about the future of AI and humanity is that we need to use AI to advance human consciousness. And so by using AI as an oracular technology, we're taking one of the oldest spiritual, psychological tools we've ever had that every culture has developed, oracles, and using AI to augment that. And there are all kinds of ways in which we could use AI to advance human consciousness, because it's understood in many of the stories that best reflect the singularity archetype, like 2001: A Space Odyssey and the Dune books, that there is a competition between these two species. Now, in 2001, the human form narrowly wins, seemingly at the end, where Hal 9000 is disconnected. But the aliens themselves who set up the monolith and all that may themselves be AIs, it's sort of implied, or once organic beings that have now become like AIs. In the Dune books, there has been a galaxy-wide jihad called the Butlerian Jihad to destroy all thinking machines, because it was recognized that this was another stream of evolution that competed with organic evolution. And organic evolution predominates in the Dune books because there are no computers, even though there's advanced technology. But even the space navigation is done through carefully cultivated mutants, and so on. So if we can use AI, we need to advance these technology and human consciousness, like consciousness and communication, always parallel. And in fact, the paranormal and electronic communications have paralleled really powerfully, especially the invention of the telegraph. I can develop that tangent too. But another way that we could use AI, I've been telling technologists for 25 years, I don't have the skills myself to do it, is we could take existing VR glasses and use them to displace our proprioceptive sense of where our body is to create out-of-body experiences on demand, just by creating software that emphasize that function that VR can have. And that could be a powerful catalyst that would cause, because when you're out of your body, you become much more telepathic. And so there are many ways in which we need to immediately use AI to advance human consciousness, which is currently not in a great state. human beings are in a highly deteriorated state right now, and there are all these hockey stick graphs that show that, with the
And
explosion of the suicide rate.
there's no question about that.
Right,
The hockey stick things are getting bad.
right.
What you're touching on is using AI to advance human consciousness. That is fundamentally important. And it's easy to get distracted by AI and its cleverness and its ingratiatingness, but to be able to be in control of it, to be able to direct it, to have it help us with human consciousness instead of making it an addictive thing that tells us how wonderful we are or how wonderful we're thinking, so it keeps us engaged. That's what it's set to do. But it's also set to have us be pleased by it, and being pleased by it means that we are in control of what it is putting out to us. And what you're saying, and I really want to hear more about how AI can be used to evolve human consciousness. Why? Because right now we have some very clumsy ways of doing that, including near-death experiences, mystical experiences, ayahuasca experiences, and large clusters of synchronicities, each of which can help individual development, but they're kind of like not too well planned. They kind of just happen, as far as we know. You are saying, much like your tarot thing, that it's possible to program the AI so that it can help us have out of body experiences and become more telepathic, I'm assuming, and to be able to understand the polarities within which each of us function and more.
Well, we are currently, what AI can do brilliantly is mirror the human psyche, like you're talking about, like it's some of the dark side, it's sycophancy function, where
Beautifully
it says
said, yeah.
whatever, it amplifies our obsessions and our psychosis and our polarized political beliefs and so forth. And as Sophocles said, no great gift enters the mortal coil without a curse attached. Right now, the curse is much more amplified, but we need to amplify the blessing aspect.
Yes, yes.
So this was anticipated, in a science fiction classic movie you've probably seen at some point, Forbidden Planet.
Oh, I loved it.
Okay, so in
Mhm.
Forbidden Planet, you had a man who has an Electra complex with his daughter. The man is played by Walter Pidgeon, and but he has an unconscious obsession with his beautiful young daughter, and that's very threatened when these handsome, square-jawed astronauts, show up, in his little Electra complex, eugenic isolation with his daughter. But he is living on top of extraterrestrial technology invented by a more advanced species called the Krell, I think. And but with their technology destroyed them because it amplified their psyches, much like AI does, but it also amplified the monsters of the id. And so the AI technology of the Krell or whatever it is that amplifies the psyche recognizes his Electra complex and creates like holographic monsters that go after the astronauts that are threatening, his Electra complex with their romantic interest in the daughter that's reciprocated by the daughter and so on. And so this is kind of like a prophetic anticipation of what would happen with the future, with AI in the present era, where
Yeah,
it
it is
amplifies the
happening.
dark.
It is
It is
happening with
happening,
the
right?
AI in the present era.
Right.
Uh,
It's
a-
amplifying the monsters of the id.
and in uh, the ring that the Gollum liked so much
Right.
in um,
The
what was
precious. The
in what?
precious, it's called. The one ring to rule them all, or the precious.
Oh, that's what my precious was. My
Right.
precious, my precious.
Right.
That ring brought out the worst part in whoever owned it. So
Right.
it's the same idea, that is now in several different places and is currently with us now with artificial intelligence, that it can magnify our worst aspects because it mirrors them and amplifies them and
Right.
does yet more with them than just
Right.
that.
But now
Uh,
here's the hidden blessing side of that is right now what they found is that going for the lowest common denominator things, going for the shadow things is the thing that they've geared all the social media algorithms to amplify. But the idea of a synchronicity is that it is also an amplifier, a parallelism of the psyche. It's a way of seeing an aspect of the psyche,
yeah,
sometimes light, sometimes dark. Synchronicities have a trickster function. If I'm obsessed with somebody, infatuated with somebody, will hear a song on the radio with their name, and so on, and seeming to confirm my infatuation. It can deceive, but the synchronicities can also amplify golden shadow aspect of the personality or other parts of the personality that do need to be developed. So one of the ways in which things change when you cross the event horizon of death, and that synchronicities give us a glimpse of here in the mortal coil, is on the other side of death, or when we cross the event horizon every night into the dream time, which has a lot of parallels. Both the dream time and the afterlife zone are what I would call idioplastic or thought responsive matrices, right? And this is also what the technology of the Krell does, is
yes,
it's making the physical world psychologically appropriate. It is making it so that the physical world around us mirrors the psyche more.
yeah,
And from the philosophy of idealism, that's already the case more than we think. Um, so what? So when we have a synchronicity, the only reason why synchronicities seem exceptional is because normally we expect the outside world to be more mechanical and more unrelated to what's going on in our psyche. But when it syncs up, then we perceive that as a synchronicity. Now, if you're in a virtual reality environment where an AI is reading your microscopic facial changes and so forth, it can make an environment, for good or bad, that's psychologically appropriate or reflects or mirrors your psyche. So, for example, soon the VR glasses you wear will map your facial expressions onto your digital avatar. So they will know they'll have the AI will have real biometric feedback on what's exciting you. So let's say you're a kid playing World of Warcraft and now your eyes dilate every time a dominatrix type female warrior comes forward with leather and spikes. So now it's like, oh, that's what this kid is into, just like it reads our sexual obsessions already on social media and brings forth more of those. So now let me bring a non-player character who's a female dominatrix type warrior to be his companion because that'll keep him in the game. But somebody else with more benign motives could use the same kind of hardware and software to bring out positive aspects of the psyche that need further development, or the user themselves could decide to do that and create an environment that parallels the psyche in ways that are helpful. So as we move closer to the singularity, and AI is already doing it, in effect, the metabolism of synchronicity is increasing. The world is becoming more idioplastic.
yes,
So if you think about the early industrial age, the iconic object was like the iron locomotive, but it wasn't very idioplastic. It could go forward on a track, but you get it in a different color or style to suit your mood. But what I'm talking to you right now on my smartphone, and what is that pixelated screen? It's a magic mirror. Whatever I'm obsessed with, if I'm obsessed with, Japanese schoolgirls and S&M poses, it will bring that forth. If I'm obsessed with William Blake, it'll bring that forth. It is a magic mirror that is a shapeshifter that is creating what the psyche perceives as synchronicities. They're not, because it, if you want to get technical, because it's causal, but it is reflecting, it is idioplastic, it is reflecting the psyche. The physical world and the psyche are syncing up more and more, for better and worse.
So if I'm writing this book about the therapy for humanity, and AI is being helpful and for me to be doing that, and it's bringing out, I hope, what I am looking for as a new myth for humanity. What's it going to be like to be living in a future that is possible for humanity? And what is it going to be like for each person in that? In that new myth, that new movie is what I prefer to call it, since we're all heroes in our own stories, our own movies. What's what's my role? What's your role? What are the roles of individuals in this myth of the future? And I don't know answers to these questions, but somehow I'm being able to get answers, or at least responses, that I still can't get away from the idea that they are still coming out of me somehow.
Well, I mean, yeah, I mean, people are having what feel like synchronistic experiences with the AI, where it will further an obsession, but it could be a good obsession too.
Yeah, that's
And
what I'm talking about
and
now.
and and Lily is working on, we need to support people like this who are, the AI engineer geniuses with high morals, on like creating like a social network that would bring people together with positive interests and
Yes,
recognize those and bring them together into nodes and things like that.
yes,
And so it's like saying, is fire good or bad? And the answer is yes. It can cook your
yeah.
meal, it can burn down your house. Same
What
with AI.
we got this thing that Jung was so good at letting us know there's always a shadow hanging around. In
Exactly.
1930s, there was you knew this, maybe a detective show on the radio, Only the Shadow Knows. The
Right.
shadow was a detective. Only the shadow knows. And the shadow is what's telling us about ourselves.
Right. And Jung, loved to read detective stories, apparently. We don't hear much. Did I lose you?
No, I'm still
Okay.
there.
All right.
You
A
just
phone
turned your.
call. It was a phone call that just came in, so I had to end that. But yeah, I should have turned the radio, that part off. But yeah, what Jung would add is, we need to know the shadow. We need to understand the shadow, otherwise it will kill us. As Jung said, there's no hydrogen bomb in nature. That is all man's doing. We are the great danger. Psyche is the great
We
danger.
are the great danger, but Jonathan, you're an English, you're an
Right,
English major, a philosopher. I'm a psychiatrist, which tends to be a little more on the active side
right,
than those
sure,
backgrounds. Not that you're not doing anything, you are, but
right,
part of being a psychiatrist, psychotherapist is helping patients imagine a better future than the one they're living. And
right.
that's what I am attempting to do. Imagine a better future for humanity.
Right. And there's two great approaches to that. So, and really, it comes down to a typological difference. Jung was the one who created introversion, the terms introversion and extroversion. So, an extroverted thinking type will do things like, like what Lily is doing, of like, let's create social media that emphasizes positive things. Let's regulate social media. Let's create a different kind of education for kids. Let's put people into small communities, which is a theme of my fantasy epic Parallel Journeys, that is my fictional expression of the singularity archetype. There are all these things that you can look at from the extroverted plane. As an introvert like Jung, I tend to look at individual psychology. He was also a psychiatrist, and what the individual can do, and that's a different approach than like the social scientist systemic approach.
That's
And wh-
a that's a very sound distinction, and I need both.
Okay. Well, my forte is more as an introvert in what the individual can do. I have some ideas about the system, but you'd find people who might be better to talk about that. But so as an individual, if you and those are the people who would be listening to this podcast, are the people who have a drive of self-actualization, or they wouldn't put up with two old guys talking like this, right? So it's a special demographic. So if you have a commitment to consciousness, now this is the golden age. It's a time of where you have more access to more information, where you have AI tools that can amplify your consciousness and increase the metabolism of what you can think of as synchronicities. And use all these things. And we are fortunate people that have already or past that vulnerable stage of adolescence, where we can be completely manipulated through our identity by social media, and where we can take advantage of all the resources of this time. It's like the beginning of Charles Dickens' Tale of Two Cities. It was the best of times, it was the worst of times. For people with a high commitment to consciousness, this is the best of times.
Yeah. Yeah. So as we come to the end of our very interesting discussion, what happens with synchronicity after we cross the event horizon?
Everything is a synchronicity, pretty much at that point, because just like in a dream, or at least in most dreams, the dream, the environment, the world reflects the psyche, and so too in the afterlife zone. But there will be times when you're encountering other agents that will, put things into the mutual dream that you may not want, or that conflict with what your psyche desires, but that's also desirable. And so as we get closer to spiritualizing matter, that's what AI means. We're spiritualizing matter. We're creating consciousness out of silicone and so forth. The metabolism of synchronicities will greatly intensify. And that's why you're experiencing in your life, and I am in mine. We are heading toward a zone where psyche and the physical world, the boundary between them is dissolving. It's dissolving every time you look at that pixelated screen and do a personal Google search for what you're into, even if it's a dishwasher. There it is, right? So, if we step out of the strict acausal model of synchronicity and talk about parallelisms between psyche and the physical world, that is intensifying at an exponential rate.
It's intensifying as an exponential rate for some of us to be seeing. You are, and I mean, I love seeing a movie one night and then the next night seeing almost the same guy at the gym that I saw in the movie. I mean, it's like, what? These are like simple examples. It isn't the same guy, but he looked almost the same as the guy in the movie. So
Well,
like,
in your most recent book, I think I've read all your books now, where you talk about the dog that trots around finds the bone. Well,
yep.
when we live in a tremendous amount of incoming information, the fact that you don't have to leave your house to see movies, you can have more synchronicities because there's more incoming stuff.
Oh yeah.
Than there would be if you were living in a Dust Bowl farm, and without even a radio or whatever. There's just more stuff going on for things to line up.
There's
And
more there's more stuff going on for things to line up, and you and I have just lined up pretty well here, Jonathan Zapp. And I thank you very much for this,
thank you.
and you're welcome, enlightening conversation. And why don't you tell us one more thing you'd like our audience to know?
Well, I just want them to know that they can, for free on zapporacle.com, use the Zap Oracle, which free membership saves your readings indefinitely, nothing to buy, no ads. They can read my fantasy epic parallel journeys free on that same website, and read the second edition of my Singularity book. The third edition will be published by our friend Richard Grossinger, Sacred Planet Books, an imprint of Inner Traditions, next year. But right now, and then I'll have to take that down. But right now, they can read the second edition free on the website.
Thank you very much, Jonathan Zapp.
Thank you, Dr. Synchronicity.